Okay, hello. I'm back after some lunch, and we got the code editor running, so that was nice. And it even writes to the file system and updates the thing, but this is like the static environment. And now we need to go in and implement the actual, I'm not sure what we're gonna call it. Maybe we're gonna call it a bundler environment. I'm actually not sure. But before we do that, we want to refactor this static file system to be like a general in-memory file system, because we're going to use this for both the static environment and for normalized path. What's that? Oh, normalized path. Let's have some general utils here as well. What was I talking about? Oh, we're gonna clean up here. So this in-memory file system is gonna be used. Didn't I create utils? For both static and the bundler. In-memory file system. Cool. And then we're gonna delete this one. And then we're gonna use static. So there should be an error here somewhere. Shouldn't there? Huh, weird. What's up with TypeScript? Import in-memory file system. In-memory file system. New in-memory file system. And we're all good. And this, oh, you actually have to be there. Cool. So now we have that. And then, yeah, so what should we call it? Because we've been referencing the bundler as the whole preview. And I believe even when we're using notebooks, we're still using the bundler. Even though technically notebooks could like run something like Vite, I think we're still using the bundler. I think. Ah, damn you, Apple Music. I'm changing to Spotify. Yeah, but I'm not sure about that. Does the documentation say anything about that? What is notebooks? Notebooks is a runtime escape. Sandpack. You need to run server-side examples directly in the browser. Oh, yeah. Yeah, or maybe it is... Or maybe it doesn't use the bundler. Okay, we're going to use a bundler. Or we're going to name it bundler. New folder. So this is actually the bundler. And then we're actually going to copy... What are all these utils? Wait, generate random ID. Is this being used? What was that being used for? Oh yeah, that was some specifics. Oh yeah, maybe we should read buffer and write buffer should be... Where's that being used now? Oh, we're not actually... Inject content into head. But we didn't have anything for write buffer. No, okay. Let's remove that. A lot of this stuff is really related to, yeah, but debounds is something we use for, yeah. Let's move debounds into the general utilities. And yeah, so I guess we can just do this. And then was there anything else here? No, these are specific to the static environment. Oh, don't need that. Cool. So we have the bundler. So let's just copy over this thing. And then we're gonna, yeah, I'm curious about this console hook. But at least I know we're not gonna use static browser server. So we're not gonna be using this either. We're not gonna have a preview controller. Let's remove that. And then we're probably still gonna configure the iframe, but we're not gonna do all this stuff. Maybe some of it. Like this is, now it's gonna be interesting to see what we actually need to do here. Compile. Yeah, okay. So static bundler now the naming. This should be Sandpack static preview. Let's rename that. Cool. So this should be Sandpack bundler preview. And this should be Sandpack bundler environment options. Okay, so now we're gonna take a look at, I'm a little bit scared now, because now we're kind of testing our abstraction to see if it actually makes sense. So we can look here, it's called runtime here, but we're gonna use most of the stuff here. Get transpiler context. Okay, how are we gonna sandbox setup, files, dependencies, entry, template ID, template, disable dependency processing. Oh, where did it go? Close others. Back to it. Oh, I'm a little bit unsure how we're gonna do this. I think we're just gonna copy over one thing at a time here. Yeah, and we're gonna clean up one more thing. Your file static preview ts. Yeah. I think we can just copy over everything here and then see what export. Cool. What else did it need? Then Sandpack static preview we get from here. Cool. And then we have the Sandpack static environment options. I guess it's fine that we just import it from here. Nice. Let's do the same here. Bundle preview. Yeah, let's just copy it from here. Or no, sorry. Let's copy this thing. So this will be export class, Sandpack, bundle preview. Doesn't need this, doesn't need this, doesn't need this. Cool. And then this thing. Cool. Where are we gonna start? Bundler preview, bundler static. Don't need this. We only need this thing. Okay, so this is bundler URLs. I guess this relates to the actual preview. And the way this works is that it gets a selector, but that's not the case here. We're actually gonna get the iframe here, and then we have these options, but we don't care about that. There's no Sandpack client we're gonna rely on. Okay, but we're gonna have bundler URL at least. Let's see. I'm getting a little bit dizzy. I'm pretty tired. I haven't slept enough last night. So this bundler URL would be create bundler URL. And create bundler URL. Let's see. Okay, this is interesting. So this is where team ID also comes in. Yeah, and here these come. Oh, sorry. Stable service worker ID. Okay, I guess we should just put it in here. So this is where we act. So I'm constantly thinking about how we're going to pass in the options, because the options are bound to the environment we're trying to run. And the problem is, one thing is selecting a template, because if you select a template, you also select an environment, and then we could bind the options to the selection of the template. But if you just insert an ID, we're going to infer the environment. And then if we need some options related to whatever environment we're choosing, then that doesn't make sense. So what I think we should do is that we should rather have specific options for specific environments. So as an example, quick start. So where's the code? So for Sandpack, you wouldn't have... Oh my God, sorry. So for... Yeah, but even that's a challenge. So theme makes sense. But then, so it would be like you would have... Maybe we would even call it environment options. And then each key in environment options is the specific environment. Or there could be like, yeah, I think we have to do it like that because we don't want you to like select the environment beforehand. You should just use Sandpack. But then you can configure each environment. We could call it like environments, and then each key is the environment with the respective options. I think that might make the most sense. But then there's things like team ID where I believe it is to sign into the preview. But if you have an API key, yeah, but that's something I have to figure out. That's like just one piece of it. But anyways, but if you have files, so files, so that's another thing. It's like if you choose template, so normally, sorry. So Sandpack can do, is meant to do two different things. It's meant to be, okay, here's a template, go play based on this template, but you're kind of doing a new thing, right? You're kind of forking a template and you're adding some code. But then you should also be able to open existing sandboxes and change them. And that isn't a template, that's just an ID. And the question then becomes, if I have a template, should we... I think we should think of using a template as forking. So if you insert a template, you will fork that template. Like technically inside Sandpack, it depends on the environment what actually happens, but you will fork it. And then if you have files, it's going to write those files to the file system after forking it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you're just using an ID, it doesn't make any sense to give files. So there's like quite a fundamental shift in how you think about the options when you're loading an existing sandbox versus forking from a template. Now, the thing is, forking from a template could be a sandbox ID. So it's almost like if you put like, is that good enough? Like if you put template in there, does that differentiate enough that, okay, you're gonna start something new? Whenever you load this Sandpack, you're gonna fire up a new sandbox from this template, and we're gonna add these files. As opposed to if we say Sandpack and then you just have an ID and you can't take any files. You know, it's almost like I would want to say it's almost like you should rather say sandbox. And then you would still choose static or whatever. But then you would say fork. And if you fork, you can write files to it. But you would never not fork when you're using the bundler or you're on static or notebox for that. So it's like it's fork by default if you have a template. Yeah, I just wonder what would it look like if you were to use an ID instead. And I'm not sure if you can actually get, just from a typing perspective. So if you use a template, it's going to be typed one way. Or if you use a sandbox ID, it's going to be typed a different way. I tried to do that, but I didn't have much success with that. But if you choose, yeah, so it's just that template implicitly means fork. And that's what I don't like. I don't like the implicit behavior of forking. That makes a lot of sense if that's the only way the environment can work, but that's not true anymore. It doesn't have to fork. Okay, let's spend a few more minutes banging our heads at the wall. So you could say template and then you explicitly set fork. And by doing that, you can also add files. Or maybe these are actually two different components. So you have a component that's like, so you have Sandpack. I don't know. No, but that doesn't make sense either. It really is the same experience. It's really just how it starts. Does it start by forking a template and writing some initial files if you have any? Or does it just load up an existing sandbox? It's such a simple concept, but it's very hard to express through a single component. We don't have to decide on this now, but I keep coming back to it, and I haven't like had a clear idea on how that should be done. So what you can also do is like, let's just grab this thing. Let's go into like the, or maybe we can just do it here. Oh, not new, but there we go. So what you can also do is like you have template and then you say static, right? So what's going to happen here is that it's just going to open the static template and you can start playing with it, and it will fork it. So if you were to put in like a custom ID here, it would open it and fork it. But what you can also do is like give it an object and like name, static, and then you say files, something like that. Oh, look at you. You'd rather do this. Or what if you do Sandbox? Static. Or what if you do Sandbox and then you have some ID, right? That means that's the one you're gonna open that thing. Or you can say template static. I'm getting this. And then you say template static and files. So we kind of flip it. So now you open sandboxes by default, but then you can rather choose, no, I want to open a template, and these are going to be my initial files. And then you have static options. Let's see, static options, or what did I call it? Environment options. So you have static options, you have bundler options, you have node options, or you have VM options. That could be something, at least the closest thing I have to something that I think would make sense. So it's totally up to you which of these environments you want to use, like the scope of using Sandpack, but at its full extent, like for our playground, it would need to we would need to configure all of this. So if you go to a specific ID in the playground, it's going to use that ID for the sandbox, and then we're actually going to fetch the sandbox in the background and load it up. Yeah, but again, like it's such a different. Yeah, but then it's like, okay, what if you just want to play with something, right? So what would happen that, but that's also a difficult one, because if you just want to play with something using the static bundler or node environment, that's going to run fully in the browser without an ID. There's no persistence there. But if you're just going to play with something that's a VM, we actually have to create a sandbox. So if you have like the main page is like very much like, so if the main page is very much like this in the playground, where you can just choose, like you can choose the theme, it's very much like this. You can choose the theme, you can choose the template, and then you kind of have the playground there. That's really cool. Why do we have transpile code? That's weird. Oh, is it because I have... Oh, and there you see the transpile code. Cool. Anyways, so we have kind of the advanced view or something. Or we would have, yeah, something like this. I don't know. What was I talking about? Yeah, and then you could actually just like choose your template, and it would just immediately flip to it, right? And then you play around with something, like I say, hello, you. But if I refresh, right? If I refresh this page, it's gone, right? So it's kind of like an ephemeral thing. You just play with it and then you throw it away. But then you can click a button, which is like not open sandbox, but you create a sandbox out of it. And then it just moves to a URL in the playground. But when it comes to the VM, you can't, like, the way that would work is, like, here you would explicitly say, go and create something out of this. I want to persist the thing I worked on. But for a VM, well, you could look at the template, but you couldn't change anything. Because if you want to change something, we need to actually fork it into an actual sandbox. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is like, how are we gonna handle like the persistence of this? Should we always have a template? And as soon as you start typing something, we're actually gonna create a sandbox in the background. We're gonna change the URL, and that's gonna be your sandbox. And then as soon as you save, you're persisting it to that sandbox. And in that sense, it would also work for VMs. So you can still just type something, but when you try to like save it, we're gonna fork it in the background and then put you on an ID. I think it has to work like that. But that means that you don't have the ability to just play, right? But maybe that's fine, because that's not what the playground is about, persistence. So that does make a lot of sense. But what does that mean for our API? That means that if you do some ID, you're gonna load up a specific sandbox. We're gonna infer the environment, blah, blah, blah. But if you wanna do a blog style kind of thing, you would say like template React. You could have some initial files. You could even choose environment here, like bundler. Oh, maybe we could even, yeah, because we have a React template for VMs as well. No, the template should be bound to an environment. Yeah, I'm not sure. But that's how you would do it. So then you can still just treat it as a playground. And you could also like, yeah. Oh, we were supposed to work on the bundler, but I really want to nail down a mental image of how this is actually going to be used. Because the playground is a higher abstraction than actual Sandpack. So, and that higher abstraction is the thing, like I'm not sure if Sandpack itself should not be dealing with fetching sandboxes. But it kind of does because of the VM. So that's the tricky thing here is, okay, but what if we only have this is so difficult. So if we have React, we can hook into an event, which is like on code change or something. And as soon as you make a code change or you save a file, we're going to fork it. Maybe when you save, we're going to fork it. We're going to, in the playground, we're going to listen to save events, and we're going to fork, or we're going to create a sandbox based on that, and we're going to put you on that sandbox. So consecutive saves will be persisted for that sandbox. And again, if you have a template, which is a VM, it's going to work the same. Like you can make changes, but as soon as you save, we're going to move you to your own dev box. So it's persisted. And that could be achieved only using a template. But what does it then mean if I go in and just use some ID? Well, then I wouldn't, like, if I just use some ID, but then it doesn't make sense to call it template. So let's imagine this abstraction handles everything that has to do with persistence. And then we have a VM. And with a VM, we don't really have any files or anything. We just have the ID of the VM. As opposed to if we were to implement this playground for sandboxes, we could like actually go and grab the sandbox in the playground abstraction, and we can use a template, and we could use like files like we did here. Like we could look at, like you have a sandbox ID, we look at the sandbox, oh, we need to run the React template. And these are the files. And then you continue working on it, and we're persisting it whenever you save a file. Right? That makes a lot of sense. But this makes absolutely no sense for a VM. Because the VM itself has all the files. So now you're suddenly in a scenario where, yeah, that's the core of it. Like if it's a VM, persistence is inherent in Sandpack React. Like it's in the thing inside Sandpack React. And the question is, should we then make everything inside Sandpack React? Should we also make normal sandbox persistence part of Sandpack React? Or should that be a specific thing to the playground? I want it to be inside Sandpack React because the VM works like that. Oh my god, this is tricky. I'm going to get so stuck on this. Okay, so if we have persistence inside Sandpack React, that means that we need to support loading. But that's kind of weird. Like, should Sandpack React take a API key? That doesn't make any sense because it's running in the browser. But you're not really going to use Sandpack. So, Yeah, but you don't use the API key with Sandpack React. It's something you use with the SDK. And then our playground is an example of how you use the SDK with the API key to like enhance Sandpack. And it just adds support for VMs. But the thing is, yeah. So the point is, like, you can't really, yeah, no. Yeah, okay, no, but that makes sense. Okay, that's an important factor. It's like we can't just have sandbox ID here, right? Because you need the API key to be able to load that sandbox. And that it needs to come from the server, the actual sandbox. And you need to like write to the API through your own server, which the playground is going to be an example of. So that means that you can't really have a sandbox ID there. You need a template. But that template can be, it's almost like, oh, shit. What is so technically the way you connect to a VM through Sandpack is to use something from the SDK called connect. Well, it's just a connect function which takes some session params. So even if you do like pass in like a node template there, which is like a VM, it needs to talk to the server, get some session params for looking at that thing, show it in the browser. It's going to be read only though. So there's something about like having a template. And then, no. This is bothering me. I can't figure this out. It's wrecking my brain. I'm just wondering, are these two different experiences? Loading a template and loading an actual sandbox. But the point is, you move from one to the other seamlessly. Like from forgetting about the technical stuff, the best experience is that you're on like a dashboard, you don't have a sandbox ID yet, and you've just chosen a template. And one of these templates requires you to go and requires a server with the SDK, which is the VMs. But you're still gonna load. But as soon as you save something, it's gonna be persisted. Well, I guess that's the thing. Like, do you want it to be persisted or not? And if you want it to be persisted, it needs a server to talk to. This is the thing that I'm struggling with. It's like VMs are always persisted. You have to create a new sandbox to use it. You can't get the same experience as you do with the other environments that only lives in the browser. And does that mean that these other environments should also behave like in a persisted way? That makes a lot of sense for a playground, but it doesn't make any sense if you just have a blog and you want to show an example. And you want people to like play around with the example, right? So when you save, you don't actually save anything. So it's almost like you would have to have some kind of persistence. But the point is you have to have persistence. Persistence. You have to have persistence for VMs. You have to use the API key with VMs. Oh, I hate it when like I'm like deep into technical stuff and super motivated, and then I get back to like the highest abstraction of like what the hell is the actual user experience of this thing, and then I get stuck and I just can't continue on the actual technical stuff before I kind of have some idea of how this should work. Yeah, but even this makes absolutely no sense because here I would have to set up endpoints for storing sandboxes, but I don't do that for VMs. Like VMs are so different. It's just everything's different about them. So just shoving them into this abstraction, it just doesn't make any sense. Because there's no overlapping options or anything. Like they don't, like VMs are always persisted. You can't change the template of a VM. You need to fork into a new persisted sandbox. The persistence lives on the VM, not in the database. But with like a browser sandbox, you can just run something in the browser. You don't have to persist anything. You can choose to get the template from one of your own sandboxes as an actual template, but still not persist anything new. Or you can choose to, okay, I'm going to give you this template, and when you do something, I'm going to persist it. So I don't think persistence should be part of Sandpack React. But if persistence isn't part of Sandpack React, why does it work for VMs? You know what? I don't think. And there's probably a very simple way to think about this. I'm just completely overwhelmed with all the technical details and like just add VM support. Okay, so okay, so what if when I use node, that template is a VM template. And when I do VM, we have like endpoint, whatever, /API VM. And we're going to pass in the ID of that thing. But should that just open it or should it fork it? I guess it should just open it. And then we're gonna, that's the thing, right? We can't, okay, so this is the problem. It's like we can create an endpoint that actually just opens the template, just like any other template. But that's a read-only template. So, like it's protected. And then what's going to happen is that you can change some code just like with another template. But to be able to show you that code, we have to fork that template into an actual new VM that will get a sandbox ID. But the point is that we can't do that from the browser. That also needs to happen on the server using the API key and the SDK. What does all of this mean? I think I have to step away for a bit. I need to think about this. I'm not able to move on before I have some idea of how this should work. Because the thing is, didn't we write yeah, so we had this thing about what we wanted to do. So we said you can pass an ID or so one thing we completely didn't put in here was the server component. Like there's a server component to this. Custom server. And this custom server is what's gonna give you persistence. But you having to manually set that up seems very wrong to me. It's almost like the SDK should like have some kind of middleware that you could use with Express, for example. to create sandbox persistence. And in there, you would have some endpoints that would like create a sandbox, fork a sandbox. You can update the sandbox if it's a browser sandbox, all of this stuff. Because now you have to manually implement that. Or what we can also do is like every time you actually open a VM, you fork it. You fork the template. So that's like the endpoint on the server. But you should be able to open existing things as well. Like, I just don't understand what kind of experience would you want to have? Like, every time you open the page, we're going to fork you into a new VM. And you do something there and you refresh and it's gone. And you're just immediately forked into a new VM. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you don't need persistence for Sandpack browser-based stuff, but you absolutely need persistence for VM. But okay, let's say though these are two completely different implementations, that's gonna help. So if we want to have, we're not gonna have persistence here. So that means that we're only gonna have a way for you to actually connect to a sandbox. So we're not even gonna have an endpoint here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna have a template, but what we're gonna give you is, well, what you have to pass is this session data. Yeah, I think I got stuck by that because the original implementation of the VM stuff is that you add like a endpoint to Sandpack to go and like do whatever to kind of get the session data for the VM. But that should rather be something you do outside of it. And then you can pass session data into Sandpack and it will connect to the VM. Because now persistence is something outside. So now it's more about like, how can the SDK best provide a way for you to manage sandboxes, right? Because that's part of VMs, is like managing them. Unlike a template, which is just a static piece of stuff you put into an option, which it's just very, very different. And then we could make the SDK like a middleware where you have all the endpoints you need to fire up a VM, change, like load up a sandbox, change data in a browser sandbox, whatever. The only question then becomes, certain templates is going to require you to put in like session data. But maybe we don't even need that. So instead of template, we could call it sandbox. And then instead of passing in a string, you would pass in session data. Or sandbox session. And that would be a VM session that you get from the server. And that's, at least technically, that's a much, much better separation of concerns. Because Sandpack is about opening a sandbox. It's not about persistence. And the thing you need to open a VM sandbox is that you need to get a sandbox session from your server. Yes. And if we do that, then we're completely open to like create like a really nice, and we could use the playground as a proof of concept for that middleware. So we don't have to implement an actual CodeSandbox SDK middleware. We can just implement the thing in the playground, and then we can use that for inspiration to actually create a middleware. Maybe it's even not necessary. Maybe it's enough to just have that as a reference for people who wants to have persistence of sandboxes. Okay, that helped a lot. Not use an internal URL, but just pass the sandbox session. Okay. And then we have environment options for each environment. But what does that mean for files? So files, because the reason I want an actual sandbox session here is because we have to fork it on the server before we return the sandbox session. If we return the template and you automatically fork when you save something, then you need internal endpoints inside Sandpack React for doing that. And I don't think that makes sense. Well, a challenge though is that what if you want to display the actual template? So you create like a sandbox session. That's for a template. So the user only has read-only access to it. Or it's protected. And you actually want it to fork, right? When you save something. In that case, that would need to happen internally. And but I don't know if we don't support that. Like we supported in the original CodeSandbox implementation, but this browser-based VM connection, that can't support it. Because you don't have a token to use with CodeSandbox. That's also a question. I don't know if the token that we return in this sandbox session can be used with the actual API. I believe it's only for the actual VM. Yeah, so like if we were going to do this, we would be forced to, when you save something, we would be forced to. Okay, so what's interesting about this is that we can, like we have this on save hook, right? And we can make that async. So whenever you save we're gonna actually, so on save, you have this callback, right? And what? Oh, it's HTML. Let's do TypeScript, JSX. So when you save, we can return a promise from that. So what we could do here is we could save and we could check your session if we should fork it. So what I mean to say is that we could support flipping out the sandbox session and do like this seamless transition. Like it's very cool technology that we built, that you can actually be on a VM that you don't have write access to. You can make code changes, and as you're making code changes, we are forking the VM in the background. So when you save the file, it feels like you just worked on the same thing. But under the hood, we actually forked you to a brand new VM. And that's where you're saving your file. And it's super, like it's seamless. It's really, really cool. But if we were gonna, so that's easy to do with the browser sandbox, because we could say on save, go to fetch whatever, like go and save this sandbox somewhere, and we wouldn't really have to do anything else. Well, I guess that one's also a little bit tricky, because we might have started with like a node thing, or sorry, like React browser sandbox. And then you go in and we say on save, we actually want to persist this into a new sandbox. And then we kind of want to render again. And then sandbox isn't React anymore. It's going to be this params ID that you have from your URL, right? But we don't want to reload the whole Sandpack. We want to stay in the same experience. We want to have this seamless transition so that it doesn't remount. And so what I want to say is, like, it shouldn't be on save. It should be, you can still have on save, but you can also have on fork. So that means if you have your sandbox, and that sandbox is like a template of Node, for example, or React. So putting a template there means that this is a read-only thing. You can't do anything to this. You have to fork it. As soon as you try to save it, we're gonna run on fork. And files here, I think that should also be here. Well, that's a problem because you can only have initial files of a template that's running in the browser. You can't have that on a VM, because if you have it on a VM, we have to fork the VM first before we can write the files. So yeah, I think that was like my first intuition, being told that we're gonna have VMs in Sandpack. Is like, yeah, but you can't have initial files. Like, you have to create the template on CodeSandbox. That's where you create the initial files. You can't just pass it here, because then we have to fork the VM, and then suddenly we have persistence. So and then it will be like, okay, let's have Node here and no files. And if we do that, then it's not going to fire any of this. But the first time you save, it's going to call on fork. And then we can go and actually fork the sandbox, and then we can return new information here. So it's an async thing. We return the new information of the actual sandbox, right? And we could change the URL and everything. And internally, it's the same Sandpack instance. It just changes its internal operating mode, right? And then on save, it's going to go and save to the... Well, it depends on the environment, right? If you have a VM, when you save, it's just going to save it to the VM. But if you have a sandbox, a browser sandbox, we have to go to the server to actually persist it through the API. It's such a beautiful idea to just like, it should just work. But this is, goddamn, this is tricky stuff. But again, like, if I were to just have the template there, but what if I have files? Well, then I have to instantly fork to be able to show those files. So it doesn't make any sense to fork. So it's almost like, I want to say that VMs doesn't support files. Or, oh, okay. Or something like, think. Or we would have to you know what? I have to think about this. I can sit here and stare at the screen, but I can't move on until I have a clear idea of how this is going to work. Because any like technical implementation now is just going to be like, I'm constantly going to be thinking about this. So I think I'm going to stop the stream, and I'm not going to do another stream until I figure this out, or at least have a suggestion on how it could work. And then we can jump back into actually creating the bundler environment. Yeah, we're not getting anywhere with this. This needs some more thought. So yeah, and I won't have time to actually do another stream today. Yeah, this sucks. This was supposed to be fun, but yeah, very often it turns out very differently. Okay, yeah, that's it. Have a nice day, and I'll be back when we have a clear plan of what we need to do. Cool, bye.